right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Polly Middlehurst. It's 6 o'clock and I'm in the GB newsroom with the headlines for you. And our top story, a second attempt to evacuate civilians from the city of Mariupol in Ukraine has failed today as Russian shelling continues despite promises of a ceasefire. That's according to Ukraine's Interior Ministry. Evacuations were scheduled to begin at noon local time and last until 9 o'clock tonight. And it follows the collapse of an agreed ceasefire yesterday in 2 areas of the country. Meanwhile, Mariupol's mayor, Vadim Boychenko, says as many as 400,000 people are now stuck in the southeastern city.
During the first days of the war, we counted the victims in tens. Today, we count them in hundreds, and in 2 days' time, we'll likely count them in thousands. They will not give us an opportunity to count the wounded and the killed, because the shelling has not stopped for the past 6 days.
Meanwhile, the US Secretary of State says there are very credible reports of deliberate attacks by Russian forces on civilians in Ukraine. Antony Blinken is saying Washington is now documenting that evidence to establish if war crimes have been committed. It follows the Ministry of Defence here accusing Moscow of targeting populated areas. Russia denies the allegations. In a video address, President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine appealed directly to Russian citizens themselves.
We Ukrainians want peace. Citizens of Russia, for you, this is a struggle, not only for peace in Ukraine, this is a fight for your country, for the best it had, for the freedom that you have seen, for the wealth that you have felt. If you keep silent now, only your poverty will speak for you later, and only repression will answer. Do not be silent.
President Zelensky there. Well, staff at a Ukrainian nuclear plant that was attacked earlier this week say it's now operating under the control of Russian forces. That's according to the International Atomic Energy Agency. Russian military at the Zaporizhzhia power plant have also cut off the internet and some mobile networks, complicating communications within the plant. And here, Boris Johnson has told President Zelensky of Ukraine that Britain stands fully behind the Ukrainian people. In a phone call earlier today, the leaders discussed the increasing threat from Russia, and the Prime Minister underlined the UK's determination to ensure Vladimir Putin fails. It follows his unveiling of a 6-point plan to tackle the Russian president, ranging from humanitarian support to inflicting more economic pain on Moscow. The Ukrainian military are helping residents in the city of Irpin escape amid Russian shelling. Ordinary people were seen running away and rushing as missiles hit an area, destroying homes and local buildings. Russian President Vladimir Putin saying in Moscow it will halt its operation if demands are met. Well, the former diplomatic reporter Nick Going told GBNews the humanitarian crisis has been used as a weapon of war by Putin.
We are now seeing Putin using the humanitarian reality of several million, if not maybe 10 or 15 million refugees within the next 2 or 3 weeks. 2 or 3 weeks. That has a massive destabilizing impact on many of the nations who are receiving them.
Meanwhile, police in Russia have reportedly detained over 4,000 people following protests against President Putin's invasion of Ukraine. Anti-war protesters were beaten in Moscow with batons and kicked by police as they were arrested. Footage also shows demonstrators, some of them elderly, being escorted onto buses by security forces. Here, the Home Secretary, Priti Patel, has said the UK is doing everything it can to speed up efforts to grant visas to Ukrainians fleeing the conflict. Over 1.5 million refugees have left Ukraine for neighbouring countries over the last 10 days, with the UN saying it's the fastest growing refugee crisis in Europe since World War II. Priti Patel says the UK is offering support to those fleeing the conflict.
We are doing everything possible to surge applications and to help people fleeing Ukraine, fleeing the persecution that Putin is inflicting upon Ukraine, to come to our country. And we're working with the Ukrainian community, the Ukrainian diaspora community in the United Kingdom.
Priti Patel speaking earlier. On TV and online, you're with GB News.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK is looking fine and dry for most of us, but turning chilly under clear skies. Let's take a look at those details. After a fairly cloudy afternoon, there'll be some clear spells this evening across the southwest of England, especially in the east of this region, feeling a little chilly. Further east, it will remain dry this evening with cloudier skies to the south of London, keeping a frost at bay, clearer to the north. For Wales, it will be a chilly and cloudy evening, though clearer skies closer to the west coast will mean an early frost will develop. For the Midlands, it will be dry for all this evening, clear skies across the west coast with a frost here. Further inland, a little mild under the cloudier skies, but still feeling chilly. Across the northeast of England, many will see clear and starry skies this evening, which by morning will mean there will be a widespread frost with lows of -4 degrees Celsius. Similarly, across Scotland, most will see a clear, calm and frosty night, though closer to the coast it should stay just above freezing with a stronger breeze in the west. Northern Ireland will also see a dry and clear night, though it will be a little breezy, which means that frost will be restricted to sheltered, low-lying areas. Another dry and fine day on Monday across the UK, with the best of the sunshine across the north once again. That's how the weather is shaping up overnight and into tomorrow morning.
Good morning, you're watching GB News and this is The Political Correction. We're here for the next 2 hours to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge. This is not about journalists talking to journalists, it's about you telling us what you think. Coming up this hour, 400,000 residents trapped in Mariupol in Ukraine will be able to leave from midday under a temporary ceasefire that will last until 9 p.m. this evening. Yesterday, a similar plan was abandoned after the ceasefire was not fully observed. The Prime Minister comes up with a 6-point plan to defeat Putin and hopes world leaders will get behind it. Meanwhile, the Russian president described sanctions imposed against his country as akin to a declaration of war, while our Defence Secretary, Ben Wallace, tells the Kremlin, don't test us. Plus, later in the programme, we discuss US President Joe Biden after he delivered his first State of the Union address this week. Now, as always, we want to hear from you here on The Political Correction, so get involved by emailing us at gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet us at gbnews. This is The Political Correction. So to bring you up to date with the latest coming out of Ukraine, council officials in the port city Mariupol say humanitarian corridors will open again following yesterday's ceasefire collapse. Civilians will be able to evacuate along an agreed route from midday local time. Well, here in the UK, Prime Minister Boris Johnson is to set out a 6-point plan of action on the Ukraine conflict to ensure Russia's invasion fails. It's reported that his plan includes the mobilisation of an international humanitarian coalition for Ukraine, supporting Ukraine in its efforts to provide its own self-defence, increased economic pressure on Russia, resisting Russia's creeping normalisation of its military actions. Diplomatic resolutions should be explored by the international community. NATO should seek a rapid campaign to strengthen security and resilience. Well, Defence Secretary Ben Wallace issued a stark warning to Vladimir Putin not to underestimate the West, while the Russian leader said Western sanctions are equivalent to declaring war. My first question, Paul and Arlene, is what did you make of Putin's comments there that the actions of the West are akin to war? Paul?
Well, I guess that's rhetoric, and that's something that we're used to from Putin, to be fair. But, you know, at the end of the day, we do need a situation where Russia withdraws its troops. This is clearly a war of aggression. There's no question about that. But we also need, I think, a settlement for those areas in eastern Ukraine, those Russian where lots of ethnic Russians are, the separatist areas as they're called, because there is evidence unquestionably, I think, over recent years of mistreatment of some of those ethnic Russians in the east of Ukraine. So for me, just simply demanding the withdrawal of troops and a ceasefire, whilst that, you know, is of course right, we need to do more than that, and we need to look at the reasons why the conflict exists in the first place. I don't think we've been particularly good in this country examining some of the core reasons for the conflict. I don't think we've been good at perhaps recognising that there are some grievances from the ethnic Russians in the east. And we need to, I think, get some sort of settlement based on the Minsk agreement, which was designed to give some sort of autonomy to those regions of Luhansk and Donetsk. So look, on the one hand, I think you can clearly say it's a war of aggression. It's absolutely wrong, and Russia should get out of Ukraine. It's no business being there. But we've also, going forward, got to look at a way of reaching a settlement that delivers on, one, safeguarding Ukraine's status as a sovereign territory, but also looking at the concerns of ethnic Russians, which have not been properly addressed.
And we've heard Putin sort of making veiled threats of potentially pressing the nuclear button. What do you make of that, and how worried do you think we need to be about it here in the West?
Look, I mean, whenever any leader of any big power uses the nuclear word, then of course it is a concern. I suspect in this case there's probably quite a bit of posturing going on. I think, you know, the whole point about nuclear weapons, it's mutually assured destruction, isn't it? It would be absolutely crazy for any leader to use nuclear weapons when it knows that it's likely to be on the receiving end of the same thing. So I think that this is just Putin deciding to ramp up the rhetoric, to send a warning shot across the bowels of the West. And I think there's two ways the West can approach this, really. It can either respond in kind, and it can start saber-rattling itself, or it can try and take the heat out of that situation and say, look, we're not going to get involved in that sort of talk, in that sort of game, that sort of posturing. There's a very serious issue going on here. A country has been invaded. We need to make sure that those troops are withdrawn and reach a settlement and leave all the rhetoric to Putin.
Well, Arlene, we've heard there the Prime Minister in his 6-point plan talking more about sort of diplomatic solutions. Do you think it's realistic that we can achieve a diplomatic solution to this conflict?
Well, I hear what Paul says about the eastern provinces, and undoubtedly there's been a problem there since the invasion of Crimea, and there's been issues raised. But I think actually by invading the whole of Ukraine, Putin has made it even more difficult to deal with that particular problem. And rightly, the Ukrainians will want to protect all of their territory now. The war isn't going as well as Putin thought it would be. We're told that he thought he would be able to take Kyiv in a short, sharp burst of activity. That hasn't happened. And the Ukrainians are certainly putting up a very spirited fight. But look, I think we have to understand that this is Russia we're speaking about. And therefore, even if he were to win in Ukraine, and we've heard the Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab today say that this war might last for months, even years, Even if he were to win in Ukraine, how is he going to, as we often say in Northern Ireland, you can win the war, but how are you going to deal with the peace? And are you really suggesting that those Ukrainians who have fought in such a way to protect their sovereignty are just going to roll over and allow Russia to put in a puppet, if you like, as president or prime minister? So diplomacy is absolutely part of what we need to be involved in, but we do need to support the Ukrainians through making sure that they have access to lethal weapons and also, of course, in the humanitarian aid. I think the Prime Minister and his 6-point plan is very much putting out there that the UK is leading the way in the response. I think that's very positive for the UK, and I think the PM has stepped up to the mark in dealing with what has been a horrific time for those people living in Ukraine.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that the Ukrainian government have been calling for is for NATO to impose a no-fly zone over Ukraine, which at the moment is being resisted on the basis that if a Russian plane was shot down, the Russians would consider that an act of war against them. Arlene, would you support a no-fly zone being imposed?
No, I don't. And I say that having interviewed a Ukrainian female MP on Friday on my own show, and she was very, very upset that the West and NATO were not coming forward with proposals for a no-fly zone. And she's, it was a very emotional interview that she gave around all of that. But I think that sort of escalation will bring us into a war situation between NATO and Russia. We do have to do all that we can to support Ukraine. We do have to do all that we can to make sure that NATO is prepared if Putin decides to push this even further. We have to give humanitarian support. But I think it would be wrong to put a no-fly zone into Ukraine at this present moment in time. We need to try and find a solution to what's happening there on the world stage. And to be fair, I think, as I've said, PM is pushing for that.
And Paul, would you agree with that? Would you like to see a no-fly zone implemented?
No, I can't think of anything worse than having a no-fly zone. Essentially, it would just up the ante. And the moment, NATO forces or whoever it was came into contact with a Russian jet or shot down a Russian jet, you are potentially into World War III territory. And that's not hyperbole. I think that's where we potentially find ourselves. So, I mean, on the one hand, look, you can perfectly understand Ukrainians who feel completely under siege demanding that Western partners come to their aid and implement the no-fly zone. And, no doubt if we were in that position, we'd be making the same demand. But actually, from our point of view, I think we have to look at the broader politics of the whole thing. And, I've been slightly concerned to hear some commentators you might otherwise regard as being sensible make this particular demand. Because for me, there would be no other outcome than you're into a conflict between the West and Russia, and who knows then where that might go. We've already talked about the potential for nuclear weapons to be used. We hope that wouldn't happen, but that would certainly increase the chances. So it's an absolute no-brainer for me, and I cannot imagine why otherwise sensible people are even raising it as a prospect.
I think it's really understandable that the Ukrainians are, though, seeing what's going on with the jets flying over, the missile strikes and other now seemingly larger bombs being dropped on some of those Ukrainian cities. I think it's been interesting today seeing the Foreign Secretary's interview in the Express, if either of you caught it, where she referred to the conflict in Ukraine as the struggle of our generation to protect the values of freedom and democracy. And I think, I would completely agree with that statement. But the thing that I found particularly interesting that she said was talking about how the impact here in the UK on things like energy prices. People are understandably concerned about the cost of living, but the Foreign Secretary saying people may have to pay more, but it's nothing like the cost that the Ukrainian people are suffering. And I'd be curious, viewers at home, send us your thoughts. Are you willing to pay a little bit more for your energy bills in the sense that we are helping Ukraine defend their sovereignty and defend their freedoms? Because the impact at home is going to be pretty big, isn't it, Paul?
It is, but unquestionably it is in terms of fuel prices potentially, etc. But at the same time, I think we need to avoid hyperbole. I mean, that kind of presentation by Liz Truss as this being a battle between, good and evil, as if there are very, very clear lines there. Well, look, there's no question it's a war of aggression. There's no question Putin is a ruthless, tyrannical dictator. I don't doubt that for a second. But, as I've said before, too few people in this country, I think, are examining the backstory to the reasons why we find ourselves where we are today. We do need to have a debate about NATO expansion. That doesn't mean to say that because NATO is looking to expand westwards, that gives Putin some sort of right to march into those countries. But, the idea of not expanding right up to Russia's borders was something that over the years has united the likes of Gorbachev and Henry Kissinger. There are serious people who think that the move by NATO up to the borders of Russia was not a particularly wise one and was inviting this sort of response, in the same way that if there was a Russia-China military alliance that planted itself on America's doorstep in Mexico or something, the reaction from America would probably be the same. So, and I do think we also need actually to discuss the nature of Ukraine as a country. I mean, there are many good people and politicians inside Ukraine, but there's also a lot of corruption inside Ukraine. There's a lot of ultra-nationalists operating inside Ukraine. The president himself has shut down TV stations in Ukraine. It is not above that kind of type of style of government, that kind of corruption. So this kind of depiction as all good on one side and all evil on the other isn't accurate, and we need to avoid that. It's not helpful in the long run in terms of the debate.
We spoke there about hyperbole, Paul, and I think one of the things that we want to discuss is this sort of sense of Russophobia, with the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov accusing the West of engaging in a Russophobic frenzy after prominent figures both in the EU and the United States called for Russian citizens to be removed from their countries. That included Democratic Congressman Eric Swalwell, who proposed kicking every Russian student out of the United States to send a message to Putin. But where do we draw the line, and is it fair to penalise ordinary Russian citizens for the actions of their leaders? Arlene, what do you make of that?
Well, no, it's not. And I mean, I know that there are Russians living here in Northern Ireland, and I wouldn't want them to feel that they were isolated at this time and that they were being identified as being supporters of Putin, because I know that they're not. So I do think we need to be careful around all of this, this sort of identity politics taken to the nth degree, where if you're from a certain place, then obviously you're a Putin supporter is completely wrong, and we need to call that out. I can completely understand why we have taken the action in relation to sport, in relation to those sorts of issues, because that hurts the Russian country as such. But when we start identifying individual, ordinary Russian citizens who live and maybe have dual status here in the UK, I think that is a problem, and we need to be very careful about that.
I mean, we've even seen now a cat shelter, isn't it, saying that something about Russian cats not being allowed. I think it is getting a little bit much. But Paul, what do you make of it? Because you and I have discussed before this sort of sense of Russophobia perhaps kind of being exposed as a result of this conflict.
I mean, look, targeted sanctions are one thing on the oligarchs and on Russian politicians, etc. But some of the stuff that we see, and I think, frankly, is completely over the top. Russia being banned from the Tree of the Year competition, as you said, Russian cats being banned from competitions, 16, 17-year-olds Russian players in the Russian and Belarusian players in the Canadian Hockey League being banned from playing. It just strikes me, actually, that it's completely the opposite to the approach we took, for example, after 9/11 and 7/7 in this country, where the general sentiment, quite rightly, was, look, not all Muslims are responsible for the acts of an extreme minority. We certainly should not punish every Muslim for those terrorist attacks. But it seems to me that when it comes to this, we're doing the very opposite. We're saying, well, actually, all Russians are fair game. Everything and any one Russian is fair game. And it almost is some sort of collective punishment. We're saying that Russian citizens are effectively responsible for the actions of their government.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to the Political Correction. Now, Vladimir Putin and his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping met face-to-face ahead of the Winter Olympics held in Beijing last month. And Jinping declared there was no limit to his country's newly strengthened relationship with Russia. This was, of course, before a full-scale invasion of Ukraine commenced. And many onlookers feel that China are now in a difficult situation diplomatically. China, alongside India, was one of 34 nations that abstained from voting on a UN resolution that condemned Russia's invasion of Ukraine. They've yet to condemn nor condone the attack and have said they will not interfere in the internal affairs of others. So what does war in Europe mean for China, and could it potentially affect their relationship with Taiwan, who Beijing sees as a rogue province? Joining us to discuss this now is Steve Tsang, the director of the SOAS China Institute. Steve, thank you for joining us this morning. What is your analysis of the fact that the Chinese leadership have stayed very quiet over the situation in Ukraine?
Well, I think the Chinese government is staying quiet because Xi Jinping was slightly misled when Putin was in China. I think the Chinese leader worked on the assumptions that whatever actions Putin was going to take would happen, first of all, after the Olympics, which has come true. And the second one would be that it would not harm Chinese interests in Ukraine, which probably would have implied whatever actions over Ukraine would be very quick, very effective, and very efficient. And therefore, a change of government from one that is already friendly to China to one that is under Russian control would be perhaps even more friendly to China, would materialize. And the failure of Putin to deliver means that the Chinese are finding a bit of limits to their unlimited friendships to the Russians.
Mm-hmm. So would you say that that relationship has been strained given the current situation?
Well, the relationship is a bit strained, but the support that China will give Russia comes from the very top. It comes from Xi Jinping. I mean, we know that the Chinese Foreign Ministry had more reservations about the kind of support China is giving to Russia, but who is the Chinese foreign minister or state council in charge of foreign affairs when it comes down to relationship with Russia? The big boss has said, yes, we support Putin and we support Russia, So there's a limit to how much China can backtrack from its open support for Putin given at the start of the Olympic Games.
Mm-hmm. And how important for Putin is a good relationship with China?
Oh, I think it's absolutely critical. I think the fact that Putin held back until after the Olympics was clearly a recognition that Chinese support is important, and therefore he could not possibly spoil Xi Jinping's party, which was the Beijing Olympics. And I think we have seen that in terms of the timing, that the invasion forces were in place, kind of in place, and yet Putin held back until right after the Olympics, and bang, the tanks start rolling.
And what do you think this means for the future with regards to China and Taiwan?
Well, Xi Jinping will ultimately use force to take Taiwan. He's made it very, very clear he is not going to allow this to be left for the next generation. He would expect to get it done because it is part of his China dream of national rejuvenation. Xi Jinping cannot make China great again if Xi Jinping cannot get what he calls a sacred territory like Taiwan and bring it into the fold of the Chinese state. So that's going to happen. If they are drawing the right lessons from the Russian invasion of Ukraine, then they will probably defer any plans they have to use force against Taiwan. Because what comes out clearly from the Ukrainian situation is the importance of preparation and being able to go according to their plan. And the invasion of Taiwan is going to be a lot more complex and difficult than the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
Mm-hmm. And do you think this has given China sort of an indication of what a Western response to such an invasion would be?
I think they are still watching it. They would still want to see how effective the Western sanctions on Russia would be, how much it would be sustained, and how much the Western alliance would be able to withstand efforts to divide and rule. The Chinese would be expecting the Western alliance to come up with something similar, perhaps even a bit more, before the Chinese use force against Taiwan. And if they think the Western alliance really talk bigger and deliver less, then I think the calculations will be that they will get away with it. I mean, after all, the Western economies are much more dependent on the Chinese economy than the economic sanctions on Russia will have on our own economy. And we are now talking about a bit of a living cost crisis in this country. I think if we are looking at that kind of equivalent actions being taken against China, we are going to see our standard of living substantially fall if we break off our economic relationship with China.
Well, Steve Zhang there joining us from Director of Political Studies at SOAS. Thank you so much for your time this morning. So now we're going to move on and talk to one of our reporters over in Poland. A reported 1.4 million Ukrainians have crossed borders since Vladimir Putin instigated a full-scale attack on February the 20th. The UN describes this as Europe's fastest-moving refugee crisis since the end of the Second World War. In Poland, over 750,000 civilians have arrived since the Ukraine invasion. Our reporter Paul Hawkins is there now, and he's been talking to some refugees. Joins us from Chelm, near the border with Ukraine. Paul, thank you. What is the latest on the ground at the moment?
Yeah, so you join us in Chelm, which is, we're about 20 kilometres from Dorohusk, the crossing there between Ukraine and Poland. And we've been there for the past couple of days seeing refugees as they come across the border. And we're now here at a registration centre. This is where we've been all morning. It's actually a converted sports hall, and this is where they come if they have any sort of plan at all, then they tell the authorities, who then try to pair them up with transport to then make their onward journey to, frankly, anywhere in Europe. It could be somewhere else in Poland. We're going to talk to someone who's waiting for the bus to Lodz in just a minute. But they could be going to Belgium or Germany or France or anywhere else. Or some of them come here and they don't even have a plan. So we're just going to show you what's going on in here at the moment. There's some thing to be collected. You can stay at this registration centre overnight. We'll show you where in just a moment. But yeah, some people here waiting to be collected. In a moment, there'll be a load of buses that turn up and drop people off and then take people away. So if we just walk inside here, this is the registration. This place has been open for about a week, and this is the system they've set up. So you come here and you register with the authorities. You give them your details. There's a Ukrainian desk, and then if we come over here, this desk, by the way, is set up so people can get SIM cards, Polish SIM cards, so they can stay in touch with their loved ones. Because of course it's very difficult to stay in touch with some people in some parts of Ukraine at the moment. And then over here, if we just have a look over the desk, you can see there's loads of stuff that's been, and there's loads of centres like this all across the border that have gathered. I think this end tends to be more for the kids, really. There's some lots of baby food there, some nappies in the corner. We've got some water over here, and when people come here and they fill out the forms, they can then come over here. There are some books here for the kids, some drawing stuff. They can come over here, get some stuff. There's some food over on the other side as well. And then they can kind of, frankly, wait for the next bit of transport that they need. If they do need to stay overnight, there is an
Oh, sadly, looks like we lost Paul there. That was Paul Hawkins joining us from Poland, showing us the inside of one of the centres that's been set up to help those who have fled from Ukraine. But stay with us, because coming up after the break, we're taking a look at drug policy reform at universities in the UK. Don't go anywhere.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to the Political Correction, and we've hopefully re-established our link with Paul over in Poland. Paul, can you hear us all right? We're just trying to connect to Paul. He's got more to show us at the refugee centre there in Poland. There he is. Hi, Paul.
Hi, Diana. Just a replay. Yeah, we're at the refugee registration centre, about 20 kilometres from the border. We were just explaining the registration process, and if people do need to stay here overnight, they can stay in the sports hall there, which, you know, a month ago would have been full of people, playing basketball, five-a-side football, badminton, etc. It's now full of beds, about 400 beds. Around about 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, it's full up normally every day, and in which case people have to come and sleep out here in the kind of waiting area where they're waiting for buses. Just to give you an idea of where we are. At the moment, it's a little bit quiet, but it quickly fills up. A sudden, a couple of coach loads come in, and then this place gets full very quickly. And here they're giving out food to help with people on their onward journey. There's a lady just making some noodles there. So, mostly women and children here. Very few men, because of course, if you're aged 18 to 60 and you're from Ukraine and you don't have a medical exemption, then you can't go and then you have to go and fight in Ukraine. So mostly women and children here. Kiev. Hi, Lydia. Just tell us why you had to get out of Ukraine.
At 5 a.m. o'clock, I woke up because my mom told me that war has started. And after 10 days in the Kiev, we lived every day like depressed. We don't know what will happen next day. Every day we sleep and thought we want to wake up. So then we decided that we need to go because we are very tired. Then we left our dog, our cat, our father in Kiev, and now we are here.
I mean, and you work in pharmaceuticals. You sell pharmaceuticals for a living, yeah. And your sister's here. She's a medical student. Is that right? Yeah. And your mum's an estate agent, and you're here. I mean, how does it feel to be here now in this kind of situation?
Weird. I don't know, just weird. I feel like my neighbors just helped me because at my house just some conflict. I don't know what happened right now. I feel shocked a little bit.
But you stayed in Kiev for as long as you could, and then you had to leave because I guess you could hear the bombs and the missiles and the guns.
Yeah, we hear it every day, every night, especially night. It was crazy time. I don't know, they just feel power at the night like vampires and just started bombed us.
Have you been in regular contact with your father and your grandfather? Are they okay? Is the dog and the cat okay?
Yeah. Now they fine. My father wait for gun and to defend our country. My grandfather, he's very old, so he just defend our house like he can, take care of our dog, of our cat, and now it's hard in Kiev.
And you're safer here, and then from here you're going to go to
Lodz.
Lodz. Have you been to Lodz before in Poland?
Never have been in Poland. I want to take a trip to the Poland, but not in this conditions. But
not in this situation. You'd like to visit as a tourist, not as a refugee. Yeah, I understand that. Yeah. And what will you do when you get to Lodz, do you know? Have you got somewhere to stay?
Yeah, we have some friends in the city, but our decisions take step by step. It's every time we think, okay, what's going to happen now, and then some people just help us in every our step. Yeah. It's Poland people, it's Ukrainian people. Every just help like they can. I'm shocked. I'm thankful.
Yeah. And how do you feel about Vladimir Putin?
Hate, just destroy our lives, destroy our plans for future. Every of us has plans. We want a trip, we want to study, we want to work, we want to love. Now it's only death, it's only war, cries. But I feel that our Ukrainian people, they become stronger after this.
Yeah.
And we will become stronger. I know it.
Thank you for speaking to us, Lydia.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lydia. Lydia's story is very familiar. Speaking to so many of them here, and they're just kind of shocked that it still hasn't sunk in really that they're in this situation. They held out for as long as they could, and now they're on their way to. She hasn't even been to Poland before. Many people haven't been outside Ukraine before, and now they're having to get to grips with a new culture, a new language, and they don't know how long it's going to last for.
Well, Paul, thank you there. Paul Hawkins joining us from Poland. And I think Lydia's report there shows just the very real impact on Ukrainian citizens who are fleeing for their own safety, but also, I think, inspiring hearing her final words there, talking about how hopefully after all this it'll make the Ukrainian people stronger. But send us your thoughts. What did you make of that hearing from Lydia? And lots of you have been getting in contact this morning. Paul?
Yeah, on Russia-Ukraine, Bill says, Dr. Johnson said, every man thinks meanly of himself for not being a soldier. How much more so when we can see them on TV?
Yeah, and Michael says, are the sanctions against Russia to be viewed as a deterrent or a punishment? I think the hope was early on as a deterrent, but sadly now probably less so.
And Peter says ethnic Russians in Ukraine are certainly being mistreated at the hands of Russian shelling. We see it on our screens on a daily basis. Zelensky is just one of these Russian speakers. I mean, I'm not sure I entirely agree with that. I mean, in terms of the ethnic Russians in the East, I mean, a number of ethnic Russians, civilians included, have died over recent years since the hostilities began in 2014, and I think it's fair to say that even independent experts would say there's evidence of mistreatment of ethnic Russians in the East by the Ukrainian government. Now, of course, that doesn't, as we've said, justify Putin's invasion, but it does mean that there's a core issue there that isn't being addressed, and we should also focus on the ethnic Russians in the East as well.
We've got Ian here saying Europe's still taking gas from Russia right now. Does this mean that the sanctions are little more than smoke and mirrors? Well, I think this goes back to some discussions we've had a few times now on the political correction about our own energy security and how this has probably been a bit of a wake-up call, how we need to become much more self-sufficient across Europe, but also right here at home in the UK.
And Tony says Russia will destroy Europe if necessary. Well, when they go to war, they go to war. I think we're seeing that at the moment.
Absolutely. Arlene?
Yeah, David says any peace deal must include reparations to Ukraine. Russia must be made to pay for their terrible crimes. I think we would all agree with that. And then Ben says, am I the only one that thinks Ben Wallace is talking a load of to Putin when he says in the paper, don't test us? What has he done to help Ukraine? I know the UK has been good with aid, but that is not enough in my opinion. I have to say, I think Ben Wallace has been very much getting on with his job, Diana, whilst there was a bit of a psychodrama about other things in the Tory party. I actually think Ben is one of the good guys. He has been getting on with the job in defence and has actually been working very hard on this. So I don't actually think he's talking a load of X, Y and Z. I think he is actually saying we need to spend more on defence. We need to make sure that we have the proper equipment to defend ourselves and indeed to help those in Ukraine to defend themselves. So I don't agree with Ben on this occasion.
and nor do I on that particular comment. But do keep your views coming in. We love to hear them. Email us on gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet us at gbnews. Now, a new report has been published this week examining the approach that universities take to drug use on campuses. The publication looks at whether a zero-tolerance approach is working, with particular concern about students' mental health and their willingness to come forward for help with substance abuse. The report argues that a public health approach needs to be adopted in order to tackle illicit drug use, such as those used for tobacco and alcohol abuse. So why has this report been published and what direction should be taken on the back of it? Well, I'm delighted to say that the co-authors of this report, Arda Ozbakuya, and the co-founder and director of Neurosite and professor of forensic psychology at the University of Durham, both join me now. Guys, thank you so much for joining us this morning. So just tell us a bit about your new publication. What drove you to write it?
Hi. So we've been observing that there's a problem in the higher education sector about illicit drug use. We see students dying due to drug-related causes every year, and the current policies haven't been effective at successfully addressing this problem. And that's why we wanted to write this report, suggesting that a zero-tolerance approach may cause more harm than good. So what we propose is a more tolerant approach, meaning a shift from criminal justice-based approaches to public health-based approaches.
And is that proposing a move towards a public health basis clearly for users, but would you argue that we need to decriminalise users as well as distributors?
Thanks very much for inviting us in. Our report is about users, and my background on this was looking about concerns around mental health. Because it seems to me that there's been growing mental health problems in universities, and I think part of that has been exacerbated by the pandemic and the impacts of the pandemic. And this may have led to more students turning to drugs. And it seems to me that if we're serious about trying to address mental health in our universities, then it's very important that we look at the area of drug usage and the interaction with drug usage and potential mental health issues, whether as a cause or effect of that usage. So that's the primary focus of our report on users and how we can help them to come forward and provide appropriate support. That's what we're advocating.
So would it be relying on students to effectively sort of self-refer and present themselves for treatment and for help?
Well, from my perspective, that'd be an important part of that, to let people know that if they come forward, we're not immediately going to go to the police or, seek to criminalise someone. What I wouldn't want is a student who is suffering from some mental health difficulties or some drug-related difficulty and not feel able to come forwards for fear that we may go to the police about them as our first port of call.
So in terms of mental health impacts, I suppose there are sort of two strands to this. One is the actual impact of addiction, but the other is the actual long-term impact of the use of psychotic substances. And I know that the report specifically talks about cannabis here.
Yeah, Aldo, is that one you want to pick up?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, so of course there are sort of two impacts on mental health. The first is actually the impact of addiction itself, but the second is the actual use of psychotic substances and how that can impact. And your report specifically talks about the sort of recreational use of cannabis.
It doesn't only specify cannabis, it talks about all drugs, and it includes prescription drugs as well, because we've also observed that, during COVID especially, there was an increase in prescription drugs usage, such as benzodiazepines. It's not just cannabis, but we think that, an approach based on public health and harm reduction better educates people on the long and short terms of risks of drug use. Concerns around long-term use is real, but that's exactly why we suggest harm reduction, so that we can ensure we can help more students before they develop a long-term habit. It's about being preventative, it's about being proactive and not just reactive at a point where that relationship between a student and drug use has already become problematic.
Mm-hmm. And I think I would add, I think we need to be proactive with our students about letting them know of the dangers and problems with drug usage too. We don't need to wait until, as it were, they develop a drug habit. We want to intervene as early as we can as part of that program too, because we think some students come to universities with little knowledge of this area. It might be their first time experimenting with drugs. We see that as a time of potentially high risk where they're not aware of just how risky some of that behaviour is. So I think we need to take a proactive approach to try and discourage that. But if that discouragement doesn't work, and I think it won't work in all cases, then we need to then have an approach whereby students don't feel they can't come forward to us, because we think, if people don't report to us, we can't help them. With a lot of this, we could nip it in the bud if people feel able to come forward and report to us, and we would like to have the opportunity to try and do that.
And what interaction have you had with government so far about your reports? Have they been quite responsive?
There's no specific government response, but I wouldn't necessarily have anticipated one. This is a HEPI report, Higher Education Policy Institute report. I would hope it's on the government radar. I would hope that the government would see that. But most importantly for me, it's on the radio. It's on the radar of Universities UK. It's very clearly on their radar. They've been very supportive of the report in terms of a contribution to a fuller review of this genuinely challenging area. It's a difficult area. There's not easy answers to this area.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant. Well, Graham Towell and Arda Osbakuko there joining us on the publication of their report about drugs use in universities. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Now, send us your thoughts. What do you make of what's outlined there in the report, and would you support a more public health-led approach to drug use in universities? Now, former Secretary of State for Education, Gavin Williamson, has been awarded a knighthood for public service. The MP for South Staffordshire, who was elected to Parliament in 2010 and served as Defence Secretary and Secretary of State for Education during the pandemic, suffered a series of setbacks during his time in government. And this was always going to be a controversial appointment. But does that mean he doesn't deserve it? Paul, I think I need to come to you first on this, don't I?
I think he completely deserves it. He's clearly one of the best politicians we've got. No, look.
Why do I sense sarcasm?
It's an absolute nonsense, isn't it? I mean, look, Gavin Williamson has not had the most illustrious career as a politician, let's be honest about it. I think he was sacked as Defence Secretary because Theresa May found evidence that he'd leaked something to the press from some National Security Council meeting. We saw the debacle over the exams for the GCSEs during the COVID pandemic. And it seems to me that this is just, I think, something that smacks of the old boys network. That, Gavin Williamson was somebody who clearly has done a lot for Boris Johnson in terms of supporting his prime ministership, supporting him as the leader of the Conservative Party. And it seems to me this is just a bit of payback. And I think, unfortunately, what it does do is it displays what is becoming, I think, the moral bankruptcy of the honours system. I mean, I basically believe in an honours system, but where people have genuinely contributed something to society, where they're held in high esteem for what they've achieved, not just because they happen to be good mates with the person at the top. So this will not go down well. I think it undermines the honours system generally. I think it's a huge misstep by the government, and I cannot understand why they've decided to make this award.
And Arlene, would you agree with that?
Well, I mean, Gavin is someone I know quite well because we worked together in the Confidence and Supply Agreement between the Conservative Party and the DUP back in 2017. He was very much involved at that time because he was Chief Whip before then. So not only was he Secretary of State for Defence, he was Secretary of State for Education most recently. Yes, had a difficult time, but who didn't have a difficult time in government, let's face it, during COVID, dealing with some huge problems. But he was Chief Whip for a long time as well. So I don't think we should just dismiss him as someone who was in Parliament not doing very much. He's someone who has clearly served the country, and I think it's wrong to just dismiss it in that way. And for goodness sake, we give, as a country, Tony Blair a knighthood, so don't start me on that.
Well, we had a good discussion on that a few weeks ago, didn't we, when that was announced? I think for me, the thing that I found the most kind of surprising about it is actually the timing. It seemed to come kind of a little bit out of the blue. Ordinarily, we see them in the sort of the New Year's honours list and the Queen's birthday honours list. But according to the Daily Mail, it was because back in January, when the New Year's honours list was announced, there was one of the sort of Partygate parties being investigated at the Department for Education, which the Met are now not investigating, which means that the honour has been bestowed. I think it's an interesting one. I'd be curious to hear your views at home. What do you think? Do you think that Gavin Williamson is deserving of his knighthood, or Sir Gavin, as we should perhaps now be calling him? Paul, I'm kind of curious. Do you think that it could actually be more beneficial moving forward if we took out political appointments by political parties and made it done on a more kind of cross-party public service perspective?
I just think it's whatever the system is, it's a question of judgment. Ultimately, that's what it boils down to. And I can't imagine that anybody in government didn't realise that this was going to cause a reaction. I mean, I've got nothing against Gavin Williamson on a personal level, and as Arlene said, he's probably worked hard in Parliament. But if there were, if you took a poll of the public and you said, look, which politicians would you really object to being awarded a knighthood at this moment in time? I would imagine that Gavin Williamson would have been up there at the top of the tree. So even if people in government did feel he genuinely deserved it, sometimes you just have to exercise a bit of judgment. This is not going to go down well more widely amongst the public. It does undermine the honours system. We shouldn't do it.
Well, let us know from home.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK is looking fine and dry for most of us, but turning chilly under clear skies. Let's take a look at those details. After a fairly cloudy afternoon, there'll be some clear spells this evening across the southwest of England, especially in the east of this region, feeling a little chilly. Further east, it will remain dry this evening with cloudier skies to the south of London, keeping a frost at bay, clearer to the north. For Wales, it will be a chilly and cloudy evening, though clearer skies closer to the west coast will mean an early frost will develop. For the Midlands, it will be dry for all this evening, clear skies across the west coast with a frost here. Further inland, a little mild under the cloudier skies, but still feeling chilly. Across the northeast of England, many will see clear and starry skies this evening, which by morning will mean there will be a widespread frost with lows of -4 degrees Celsius. Similarly, across Scotland, most will see a clear, calm and frosty night, though closer to the coast it should stay just above freezing with a stronger breeze in the west. Northern Ireland will also see a dry and clear night, though it will be a little breezy, which means that frost will be restricted to sheltered, low-lying areas. Another dry and fine day on Monday across the UK, with the best of the sunshine across the north once again. That's how the weather is shaping up overnight and into tomorrow morning.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask. So